Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most critical and sensitive pieces of legislation in India's new criminal code, the law on rape. We're going to break down Section 63 of the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, a law that really builds on the major legal reforms that came in after 2013, to see exactly how it defines the crime, what consent really means, and where the legal boundaries are drawn. So let's get right into it. The entire legal framework for this offense really hinges on a single powerful concept: consent. To truly get a handle on this law, we first have to understand the physical act it describes. But, even more importantly, we need to explore the 7 specific situations where consent is legally considered completely invalid. Here's how we're going to walk through it all. First, we'll look at the foundation of this new law. Then, we'll define the specific acts it covers. After that, we'll dig into when consent is considered invalid. Then we'll flip that and talk about what true consent actually is. And finally, we'll cover the legal exemptions. Okay, let's jump into our first section. Before we get lost in the details, we really need to understand the fundamental principle that holds this entire law together. And here's the key takeaway right up front. Everything we're about to discuss is built on this one idea. This intense focus on consent was a huge part of the 2013 criminal law amendments, and you can see that legacy carried forward right here. The law isn't just about a physical act. It's about that act happening without valid, meaningful consent. So what specific physical acts does the law actually talk about? Well, Section 63 is very clear and breaks it all down into 4 distinct categories. The first one is penile penetration. And the legal language is super precise here, spelling out the vagina, mouth, urethra, or anus. Now, a really critical detail is that phrase, to any extent. That means even the slightest penetration is enough to meet this part of the legal definition. The second category is a big one because it really broadens the scope of the law. It recognizes that a violation can happen with objects or other body parts, not just a penis. This creates a much more comprehensive definition of sexual assault. Then there's manipulation. The law also addresses situations where someone is forced to manipulate a part of their own body to cause penetration. This is such a critical detail because it acknowledges the really complex ways that coercion can actually play out. And finally, the fourth category explicitly includes forced oral acts, leaving absolutely no room for ambiguity. So when you take these 4 categories together, they define the physical component of the crime, what lawyers call the Actus Reus, or the guilty act itself. But remember, these physical acts only become a crime under very specific circumstances, and that brings us to the absolute core of the law, the 7 conditions where consent is legally considered absent or just plain invalid. 7. This number is everything. It helps define the mental element of the crime, what's known in legal circles as the mens rea, or the guilty mind. And the rule is simple. If even one of these 7 conditions is met, there's no legal consent. It's that straightforward. What's so interesting here is just how wide-ranging these conditions are. You see, the law makes a distinction between an act being against her will, which might imply active resistance, and without her consent, which can cover passivity or freezing up. It also nullifies any consent given under threat or due to a lie, like tricking someone into believing you're their husband. And crucially, it covers situations where a person is legally incapable of consenting, whether that's because of intoxication, their mental state, being under 18, or just being physically unable to communicate. So we've seen when consent is invalid, but the law also takes this really important step of actually defining what valid consent is. This is so important. The law demands an unequivocal voluntary agreement. Unequivocal means it has to be crystal clear, no confusion. Voluntary means it was given freely, and it has to be an agreement to participate in a specific sexual act. It's not something that can be ambiguous or assumed. It has to be actively communicated. And this right here brilliantly illustrates a fundamental principle. This was a landmark change codified after 2013, and it overturned decades of really problematic legal thinking. It means the absence of physical resistance does not equal consent. A lack of a no is not a yes. The responsibility is on showing there was a clear voluntary agreement, not on the woman to prove that she fought back. The law also includes a technical but really vital clarification. By explicitly defining vagina to include the labia majora, it just makes sure that the law provides really comprehensive protection against sexual assault, closing any potential loopholes. All right, finally, let's take a look at the boundaries of this law.
Section 63 lays out two very specific exceptions where these rules don't apply.
Okay, the first exception is pretty straightforward. It protects medical professionals who are performing necessary procedures. The second is the limited marital exception. Now, it says that sexual intercourse between a man and his own wife is not rape, but, and this is a really critical condition, only if the wife is not under 18 years of age. If she's under 18, this exception goes right out the window.
So, there you have it, a deep dive into Section 63. We've gone through the 4 physical acts, the 7 conditions that completely invalidate consent, and the clear definition of what a real yes actually means. Knowing the letter of the law is the absolute first step. But the real question is, how does this legal framework translate into real-world justice and safety? That's the conversation that this law really begins. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.